Greetings and welcome. We are in Senior AP English, and our objective for the hour now is to introduce the great romantic poet, Lord Byron. Let's get some biography out of the way and maybe look at one of his offerings to just kind of get a sense of who this cat is. Now, we already pointed out that when you talk about the romantic writers of the English Romantic period, we talk about them in two families, or two generations is often the way we refer to it. Generation 1, Generation 2. We've been messing with Generation 1 poets. Blake, Burns, Wordsworth, Coleridge. Those we call Generation 1 poets. What I like to think of as the old farts. Okay? They're kind of older, they're kind of stately, they're kind of ambassadors for the whole idea of romanticism. The second generation of poets, Byron, Shelley, Keats, these are our young hellions. And they are young, and they are hellions. And that defines them as radically different. Let's say it this way. All three of those guys struggled to appreciate Wordsworth because they considered him a little too conservative. Okay? So these are more radical poets. Let's call it what it is. For the very first time, we are now going to meet poets that are interested in sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Now, that's not to say Shakespeare wasn't into sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but he had to be somewhat guarded about it, okay? And I'm using the term sex, drugs, and rock and roll to be somewhat colloquial. By that, I mean radical. So, for example, Shelley is one of the first people in all of Europe to write a defense of atheism. He will call himself an atheist out loud. Now, of course, we're in the 21st century where it's kind of, normal to call yourself an atheist, and people just go, okay, whatever. But not in 1800. In 1800, if you called yourself an atheist, you still could get yourself in a lot of trouble. Shelley will write a defense of atheism. Okay? They will experiment in almost every way. They will experiment in their private social affairs, definitely in their sexual lives. At least two of the three. Keats more conventional in his sexuality. Byron is all over the map, okay, sexual speaking. They will they're very radical and experimental in their poetry as well, and in the things they write, as we've already mentioned. Shelley's Defense of Atheism, a classic example, all right? And yet, let's say it out loud, these poets are trained in the classical tradition. So they're going to work within the confines of classical understanding of poetry. They're all three of them, Byron, Shelley, and Keats, all three of them are going to love the ancient classical tradition of Greco-Roman poetry, especially the Greeks. They love the classical traditions of Homer, and of the great Roman poet Virgil. So they kind of do that. But now they're going to take their own views one step further, all right, as they play games with the language. And games are in many ways what they will play. So we want to kind of study their stuff this way, as almost like game playing. Let's look at Lord Byron now. Byron is a radical through and through. He's a young kid who is born, it says a lot about him, so I like to tell this story. He's a young kid who's born with what's called a club foot. That means that his leg didn't grow correctly. And so when he went to school as a young boy, he was kind of crippled, lame. He couldn't walk very well. And when it came time for PE class, he tried to run with the other boys, fell down, and they laughed at him. Made him so mad that he trained himself how to run, even though he had this club foot. And by the time he hits college, he can outrun everybody. He sets the records. So this is the kind of kid that he is. Make fun of him, and he will find a way to take you down. That's the kind of kid that he is. All right, that's just the way he is. Ultimately, he dies fighting wars. For example, this rich aristocratic kid. He will self-exile, moves off into Switzerland, where he lives on this island with a castle on it, and there's this moat. The only way you can get there is this little boat or whatever, okay? And he throws these outlandishly crazy types of parties and get-togethers and soirees. He will have all kinds of experimentation going on, very much into drug experimentation as a way to induce his poetic offerings and the like. There's a really famous meeting between he and Percy Bysshe Shelley, his pal, who becomes the second of the young guns we'll talk about, and Shelley's live-in girlfriend, Mary Shelley, who ultimately at 18 will write maybe one of the greatest novels of all time, Frankenstein. And the ideas for Frankenstein, many argue, come from a meeting that happens at Lord Byron's, castle, you see. So Byron is going to play all kinds of games. Much of his poetry is going to be a tribute to his affairs with women. He will have, how does one say it politely? He will have a certain kindred spirit with Odysseus in this regards. Okay, can I just leave it at that? She Walks in Beauty is a classic example. Let's look at it now on A34. As we look at this poem, we'll look at it both from form as well as content. She walks in beauty. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. One shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace which waves in every raven tress, or softly lightens o'er her face, where thoughts serenely sweet express how pure, how dear their dwelling place. And on that cheek and o'er that brow, so soft, so calm yet eloquent, the smiles that win, the tints that glow, but tell of days in goodness spent, a mind at peace with all below, a heart whose love is innocent. Now let's point out right away some form before we get to content. Notice that this poem is nicely divided up, right? So you have 3 stanzas, you've got your rhyming happening. Notice the rhythms. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes. Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. Notice it's not iambic pentameter, but we definitely have that rhythmic iambic beat. So he's playing games that are fairly conservative in regards to the form of the poetry itself, right? But remember, this is Byron who wrote Don Juan, the greatest love story in poetry of all time, about a young boy who ends up in his escapades, spending time inside of a harem for a number of weeks, etc., etc. Okay, so I mean, this is the guy who writes a poem like that and gets himself in a lot of hot water because he's so explicit in his sexual views. Here he's going to ask a really intriguing question. What is it that guys look at when they look at a girl? What do guys look at first when they look at a girl? To determine whether she is attractive or not. What do guys at Worland High School look at first? If we were to poll guys at Worland High School and say, just walk up to guys at random and say, hey, if a girl in your estimation is considered hot, what is it that you look at first to determine that? Jot down in your notes what you think the answer would be. It's interesting that women have certain views of this, guys have other views of this at Worland High School. What is it that you would look at if you're a guy first to constitute beauty, true beauty? Now, here, let's point out that Byron is going to be celebrating an idyllic view of physical beauty. Notice, not beauty of nature as in Tintern Abbey, or trees, or bushes, and all of this other kind of stuff, right? Notice here, it is not a rainbow we're celebrating, right? It's not a river. It's a woman's beauty. And Byron, if there ever was a man who could comment on what he thinks about as a beautiful woman, it's Byron. I mean, he spent time with some of those beautiful women in Europe. So we might say dating lots of supermodels. We might say it that way today. What is it that he's going to look at? Well, let's take a look at all 3 of our stanzas. What is it that he focuses on that constitutes the beautiful woman? And maybe we'll debate whether, in fact, it's remained the same. First of all, the very first line, it has to do with the way she walks. What does it mean to say she walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies? What does that mean? What is he saying about her that constitutes her as beautiful?
Kind of mysterious.
Mysterious. Let's write that down. This is important for Byron. If you're going to be a girl that attracts Byron, you've got to be mysterious. What does that mean, though? What constitutes a mysterious woman? Has anybody got a stab at this one? What does that even mean? Sherm, what does it mean to you? A mysterious woman.
You just kind of don't know what to expect from them.
You don't know what to expect from her. Now what would that mean? You don't know what to expect from her. Miss Varney, what would that mean? You don't know what to expect from her. Does that mean she's crazy? What does it mean to be mysterious as a woman? To be mysterious as the night?
Nobody knows anything about you.
No one really can predict her actions. One minute you think you understand her, the next minute you don't. He says, that I'll constitute as beauty. Look at the next one he looks at. And all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes. Oh, so what constitutes a beautiful woman for him? One of the first things he looks at if he looks at a beautiful woman, it is her what? What does it mean, her aspect and her eyes? What is aspect? What would that mean?
She portrays herself.
The way she portrays herself. Keep going. What does that mean? The way she portrays herself? Her physical appearance, especially her face, and more particularly, he focuses on her eyes. For Byron, everything about a beautiful woman has to do with her eyes. Do you think guys still look at eyes and they matter? Do eyes matter, you think? Notice he says, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. One shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace which waves in every raven tress. Uh-oh, what's the next one he looks at? Yeah, Byron's not going to be attracted to a woman unless she has stunning hair. Do you think hair matters to guys today to determine beauty? What do you think? Does hair matter? Klingler says probably. But she said it like this, like probably, like really? Why should guys care about hair? Notice the hair that softly lightens o'er her face. And then what is her face like? Where thoughts serenely sweet express how pure, how dear their dwelling place. What kind of face does he like in a girl? What would you say? What would be your adjective for that one? Innocent. Yes, that's right. This is important. He wants her to look innocent, young, beautiful. We'll come back tomorrow to finish up with this one. Thank you.